Hey, everyone. Hi. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Alice.
Hey now.
Greg, what are you doing here?
Hey, what do you mean? Allison,
Where'd you come from, Greg?
I came from the world of Childish, and I just want to make sure that your listeners know that you're just as wonderful on the other podcast you do.
What if they don't have kids?
Don't need them. You don't need them. A lot of our listeners actually tell us they don't have kids. We talk about sex.
We talk about all sorts of dirty stuff,
Yeah.
but also parenting stuff.
Yeah, so.
Check out Childish. New episodes every Wednesday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Maybe I should have got it fixed.
Allison Rosen is your new best friend. Allison, with her good times never end. Allison Rosen, doing the wavy pencil dance again. Allison's your new best friend.
Hey, everyone. Hi. Hello. Welcome to a very exciting episode of Allison Rosen is Your New Best Friend. My guest today is Ben Sheehan. He is the author of OMG, WTF, Does the Constitution Actually Say That? A non-boring guide to how our democracy is supposed to work. He is also a former producer from Funny or Die. The Hollywood Reporter named him one of... I was trying to do this from memory. Let's see if I can do it. One of the 35 rising entrepreneurs under 35. Did I get it?
I mean, close enough. Executive, something like that. You're good.
I mean, you get the idea. He's important is what I'm trying to say. And perhaps most significantly to regular listeners of Allison Rosen's New Best Friend, he is engaged to be married to Jackie Johnson and also to Chooch. Hello, Ben. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like several times I will be walking around the apartment and I will think Jackie's working on her computer, and then I hear her screaming and I see her that she's talking to you. So this is nice to see the person that has been in the apartment so many times.
Well, same. It's nice to see the person that she talks about living with, whose Zoom calls she ruins with her bowel movements in the bathroom in your small apartment, which actually it's a condo and it's not small. And I'm looking into it right now because you guys were in Delaware and you're back now, right?
We were there for about 4 months. We went with the intention of staying for 3 weeks, and we stayed 4 months, as one does. And then we got back maybe 2 weeks ago, I think.
It looks lovely, this condo that you guys are trying to sell.
We cleaned it.
I see. Well, what's it normally like?
It's a little messier. There's stuff. We've crammed it all into the closet behind me to my, I guess, if you're looking at it, 9 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we're just doing our best. We get notified of showings, and then we have 20 minutes to hide our things. It feels like our parents are at the lake house, and then suddenly they call and they're cutting their trip short early, and they're on their way home, and we have to clear out the house like we're having a party as if we were in high school and get everything put away. And then a realtor shows up with a person to wander around for 5 minutes and leaves.
That sounds stressful.
It is.
Well, I'm very excited to have you on the show. We need to get into all of it with the book and with Jackie and with everything. But let's first start with the fact that you were on Good Morning America this morning at a very early time, East Coast time. What time was it for you, and how did that go? Where were you? Because it looked like you were on a set.
It was, the interview started at 4:50 a.m., and I had to be there at 4:15 a.m., which means I had to leave my place at 3:45 a.m. and start getting ready at 2:45 a.m. And I was at a set in Culver City. I forget the name of it. It's the Strike or the something. Mm-hmm. It's a set. It's like a remote set that a lot of news organizations use to have people, broadcast remotely.
Got it. And how do you do in the middle of the night talking about the Constitution?
I mean, I guess I've done it enough to the point where there is some reflexive element to it, but it is hard to sleep for 1 hour and get up and start talking about the Electoral College.
Yeah. Okay. So your book, which, by the way, it's very funny. I laughed out loud at the thing about like just wishing this is not gonna, it's too long for me to explain. You're gonna have to explain it, but just wishing that cookbook authors would like just tell you how to make a fucking quiche.
Yeah.
Which was, you were explaining basically the premise of the book is the premise, which is also reality, that the Constitution is like a user manual for how we are supposed to operate, how we're supposed to run our government, it's a government for us, by us, and yet we, the average American, has no idea what's in it. And that schools spend so much time, and I'm going to give you a chance to tell me if I got this right. Schools spend so much time teaching history, which is like almost masturbatory, because it's this like preamble that is not actually useful. That was where the metaphor came in. It would be like, reading a cookbook and it's just all about like how they got the different things and like the majesty of the grain. I don't think you said that, but and you're just like, okay, just tell me how to make a fucking quiche.
That was not only was that a great premise, there were details added that were even better, and maybe in a future edition I can work in those details.
Yeah. So, you must know the Constitution inside and out. I would encourage everyone to get the book. It is written like something between like a humor book and a textbook, but very useful. Very like if you are ADHD at all, there's lots of little things that are broken out, lots of bits to get to. How did you write it? What was the process? It seems like such a huge undertaking.
It was a very large undertaking, and I basically wrote the first draft in a month. Well, I should say I wrote a treatment of it for a website. So I started an organization in 2018 called Oh My God, What the Fuck? And it's OMGWTF, and it stood for, during 2018, Ohio, Michigan, Georgia, Wisconsin, Texas, and Florida. And those are the states that we were active in, and we supported candidates for governor, secretary of state, and attorney general. We educated people on why they should care who those people are, and that's when I started to realize that a lot of people were coming to our events thinking I was talking about the U.S. Attorney General or the U.S. Secretary of State, and they didn't know that their state had those jobs. Mm-hmm. And so I started looking into civics, and I was like, wow, it's really weird that only 8 states require a year of civics or government education at some point between kindergarten and 12th grade. And so I wrote kind of a summary of the Constitution just on a whim, like a sentence or two about each article and amendment. I mean, really bare bones, and put it on our website. And then I thought, well, maybe there's something like a larger project here. And so I wrote like a really quick treatment. I mean, I don't know, 17, 18 pages, but like double spaced, like not full pages. And I had this chance meeting, and then it led to this book deal, and it was for 4 books. So one is the adult book, another's a kid's Constitution book, the other's the gerrymandering journal that is basically just specifically about gerrymandering, and then the other is the book in Spanish, which I did not translate. And I basically wrote the first draft of the adult book in a month because they wanted to get it out with plenty of time to go to the election. I basically wrote the first draft in July. I probably pulled 7 all-nighters. I mean, it was kind of a disaster. I did run it by a number of experts who pointed out some creative liberties I took with it that I had to dial back and correct. But the final version is very accurate. And it was my first experience writing a book, and also my first experience writing a crash book schedule, which is when you're trying to familiarize with something as so dense and opaque as the Constitution is definitely a lot of poring over text word for word and trying to make sense of it.
Mm-hmm. So you dedicated the book for my mom, who taught me this stuff over dinner, for my dad, who taught me how to simplify. Can you explain? And basically, I wanted to find out, like, where did your interest in and love of all this stuff come from? But I'm figuring by asking that question, we will get to that, right?
Yes. So my mom spent 15 years working in the United States Senate. And she worked for a senator from Oregon named Mark Hatfield. And when I was about 5 or 6 years old, I remember one night over dinner, she took a napkin and she drew 2 houses on the napkin. And she wrote the number 100 in one house and the number 435 in the other house. And that was my first civics lesson about Congress. And over dinner, every now and then, my mom would sort of teach me about the government, basically about her job. And I came to sort of learn about this. And even when my dad traveled a ton and he worked with a lot of politicians too, coaching them on speaking and preparing them for debates and speeches. But when he was at home, the dinner table was political conversations all the time. And so I kind of just soaked it in. I thought that everyone lived in D.C. and grew up with like parents working in the Senate and discussing the federal government and complaining about this person and that person. But I realized how unique that was. And I was really surprised. By the time I got to 12th grade, I had only had one civics class, and that was in 8th grade. And I breezed through it because my parents had taught me all of this stuff. And it was only because I had the privilege or luck of being born in D.C., having parents who worked this job and them taking the liberty of sharing it with me. So my early interest and familiarity purely came by luck and having parents who taught this to me.
What is the definition of civics?
So civics is the rights and responsibilities of being a citizen of the country. And it's different from history, as you pointed out, which is really like the premise of the book is that
as you pointed out.
Well, you summarized it quite well. And what's really interesting about civics versus history is that, it sort of gets shoehorned into social studies or it gets thrown into history, but it's sort of like there's like the rules and how things work. And then there's the story of how they came up with the rules and the amazing people that gathered in this room and came up with it. And it all bleeds together, and they're really different things. There's history, which is wholly separate from civics. They certainly are related and one leads to the other, but they are different things. And one is sort of the story of how things came to be, and the other is the blueprint for us over 200 years later to know how to operate the country.
I mean, obviously some of that is, I would imagine, just because that's how things are always done and people are just kind of, that's how we've always done it. And these are the textbooks we buy. And well, actually, I mean, I suspect I've been out of school for a long time, but so I suspect what is being taught as history is changing a little, but the emphasis on history versus civics is obviously like part of it is just habit, but you suspect there's something a little more nefarious, right?
So I was pretty surprised to learn that in 1796, George Washington gave this whole speech, his final State of the Union, and he was like, guys, we have to teach everyone how to run the country that we just set up for them a few years ago. And it didn't end up happening, but he petitioned Congress to create a national university basically to teach everybody civics. And then fast forward about almost 200 years to the 1950s and 60s, where coming out of World War II, there was this renewed sense of pride and patriotism. And so civics classes were a mainstay of our public education system. And we had classes that were different classes, a wholly dedicated civics class, a U.S. history class, another American government class, a class called Foundations of Democracy. And these were common, single, like wholly their own classes in public education in the 50s and 60s. And compare that to today, where only 8 states teach a year or require a year of civics or government at some point in your 13-year academic career. So we've fallen precipitously in about 60 or 70 years from where we used to be.
But you think that it benefits the people in power to have it be done that way, right? Or like, do you feel like it's just laziness, or do you feel like it's by design?
So I think that I can point to the problem in the last 18 years. So in 2002, No Child Left Behind was a federal law, but because education isn't a federal government power, they can fund it, they can finance it, but they can't like make the rules in each state about what you can learn. So they offered financial incentives to schools if they excelled in reading and math. And so all these schools were like, well, fuck, we got to go teach reading and math and get really good at that so we get federal money. And that continued in 2010 with Common Core, which was a group of states signing on to an initiative. And then in 2015, they updated No Child Left Behind, called Every Student Succeeds. But all 3 of these laws or initiatives were all about English language arts and math. over and over, creating new standardized tests around them, measuring performance, using that to decide if they were even going to keep schools open. So basically, I mean, talk to, teachers about this, and I have, and they've complained about that, is that the focus is so heavy on reading and math that other subjects kind of fall by the wayside. So that's the reason I can point to through my research that the last 18 years we've shrunk and kind of decimated civics. But I do find this really interesting beginning of the drop coming out of the 1960s. And what happened in the 1960s? You had the Civil Rights Movement, you had the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the Vietnam War protests, and leading to the 26th Amendment, protecting 18-year-olds' right to vote. And these were all directly due to citizen pressure and organizing and activism. And I find it interesting that coming out of those decades with those tangible results, 4 constitutional amendments in a 10-year span, and suddenly we're teaching civics less. And I do think that it benefits people in power for us to not know their jobs, not know if they're doing a good job, not knowing their power, because they can maintain it.
The emphasis on reading and math, to your mind, was that like triage? Was that like, these are things that people need to know, was education getting so bad that they had to push those to the forefront, or is there some other reason?
I don't know. This was one of under the George W. Bush administration, one of their earliest policies. And I do honestly think that it had good intentions to get more students educated in these subjects, but the narrow focus created this hassle where, because you could have your school deemed failing, because it could be shut down if you were underperforming or consolidated with another local school or lose federal funding, it did create a stressful environment that only exacerbated over the next 18 years. So I don't think there was anything nefarious there. I think it was a byproduct of a well-intentioned but flawed initiative.
So I want to get into your backstory and all of that, but I want to first ask you something that's been on my mind, and I think it's on a lot of people's mind. Knowing the Constitution as you do, is there a way that our current president can steal the election? Does the Constitution have a safeguard against that, or how would that all shake out? The story that is bandied about in my house by my husband, who is more political than I am, is that if Biden doesn't win huge on election day, and then it goes to like counting the ballots and stuff, then Trump will say that those are corrupt. And then, potentially the people that are supposed to stand by and stand down and stand by will go riot at the place where they're counting the ballots. And I'm not sure how it goes from one thing to another, but then somehow it'll go to the Supreme Court where, where he has, got his people in there, and then he will have stolen the election, even though Biden did win. Like, can this happen? So what you're describing is one of the scenarios, or a lot like one of the scenarios that this organization put together through wargaming this election. So over the summer, a bunch of scholars, politicians, former politician, military leaders, journalists from all sides of the political spectrum got together and basically wargamed potential scenarios for the 2020 presidential election. And basically what they came up with was 4 scenarios, and the only one that was a clean transition of power was if Biden won big on election night. Unequivocal, undeniable, no contesting possible, and then a peaceful transfer of power ensued. If it was a close election, either if Biden was up a little bit or Trump was up a little bit or it was dead even, it all basically played out very badly. What I will say, and what I can say with certainty, is that the president doesn't have any constitutional powers to move an election. He can't change election day. He can't postpone it because of an emergency. He can't do anything like that. Election day is established by Congress. In 1845, they made it the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And so that's what we've got for 175 years. So
the president can't do that. What is possible, however, is that the electors, the people in each state that vote directly for the president and the vice president, how those electors are appointed is up to each state, specifically the state legislature. And so what could happen is in certain states, there could be claims of voter fraud. There could be people saying that there were fake ballots cast, or people mailed in duplicate ballots, or some claims of voter fraud that either led to a recount or led to a court case or a controversy. If there's a problem with the election for the popular vote in a single state, it's possible that the state legislature could say, hey, you know what, we can't trust the results of the popular vote, so we, the duly elected members of the state legislature of Georgia, whatever it is, are going to pick the electors ourselves. And under the Constitution, they can do that. If they do it before December 8th, it counts. December 8th is bandied, the term is the safe harbor date. But all it means is that if they're going to pick an alternate means of choosing electors, they got to do it by that date if it's going to count.
And they would do it because they would say that there's too much fraudulent activity. You people are all suspect. We got to pick. I don't like that one bit. Okay, keep going.
It's possible. But what I have heard is that it also depends on the state constitutions. And most, if not all states, say that the electors either have to vote for the winner of the popular vote in the state if the state requires that the electors be faithless, or that the legislature can make them vote a certain way. So from what I understand, it comes down to state laws and state constitutions in each case, and I have not yet heard of a situation where basically the state could do that even though they have the power to do it under the Constitution because their own laws say something different.
So are you worried?
I'm worried. I used to be worried about that. The more I've looked into it, I'm less worried about that. I'm more worried about violence on Election Day, if I'm being totally transparent with you.
Please do, yeah.
There is something really scary that has happened recently, which is the expiration of a consent decree based on something that happened in 1981. So in 1981, basically right-wing militias went to the polls in New Jersey and intimidated voters, including voters of color, potential Democratic voters, with weapons, like at the polls. And they were sued, and the result was that there was a consent decree that the Republican National Committee could not organize, finance, encourage poll watchers of anything like that nature for 35 years. Unfortunately, that expired in 2017. So this is the first presidential election since the expiration of that quote-unquote consent decree that the Republican Party isn't bound by that. And they have announced an initiative a few months ago to recruit 50,000 poll watchers and use $20 million to finance these people watching the polls, making sure nothing quote-unquote nefarious is going on.
So that's what... I think you answered my question was going to be, what is a poll watcher? So poll watchers are supposed to be like hall monitors for voting, but they're actually...
So there is a technical use of poll watcher in the sense of like lawyers. Like sometimes nonprofits will send, like the ACLU will send a lawyer to a polling place to make sure it's running smoothly and people's constitutional rights aren't being infringed. So, that would fall into the category of poll watcher. The poll watchers I'm talking about that are, being reported on are people who aren't necessarily lawyers and just parts of like members of a militia just showing up to a polling place with guns and intimidating people from casting their vote through violent intimidation.
That seems so illegal.
It is, except that because of the Second Amendment, in certain states you can have open carry, some states you can't. So it depends on the state, but if you're not threatening people with anything, you're not even holding it, you just are having it in your holster and standing there, the argument could be made that you're not intimidating anybody. But these situations could go south quickly. There could be a confrontation. There could be actual violence on Election Day. And, unfortunately, this country, it hasn't happened in a long time, but this country does have a history of violence on Election Day.
When was the last time was 1981. Was there actual violence or just intimidation?
I don't know if there was actual violence, but I do know that it successfully intimidated people away from the polls, which is what led to the court case. I don't know if anyone was hurt, but you saw this in the Jim Crow South, and especially in the wake of the Civil War. I mean, in the 1920s in Florida, it was one of the most it's called the Ocoee Massacre. It's one of the most violent examples of election day. Or I should say, one of the worst examples of election day violence in U.S. history. The election of 1876 had, tons of elections before the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. You had this type of thing happening.
If you receive an absentee ballot but drop it off at a polling place, do you know if that counts as early voting or like when that's counted?
So different states have their own rules for absentee balloting. So for example, 45 states have said that you can use COVID-19 as an excuse to vote absentee. 5 states have said that you can't. Mm-hmm. One of those 5 states is Texas. So that's, the second largest state. So that affects a lot of people. Texas, you have to be either have a physical disability, you have to be out of the state, you have to be incarcerated, or you have to be over 65 and over to vote absentee. Otherwise, you have to vote in person. So because the Constitution says that states run their own elections, the times, places, and manner of their elections, even for representatives and senators, elections are largely run at the state level. So we have all these different rules, like different, windows for early voting, different numbers of polling places, different times that they're open, different rules around absentee voting or early in-person voting. It's all dependent on the state. So, my answer is it depends on which state you're talking about because they have their own rules. Although Congress can override those rules with a sweeping federal law, like establishing a single day, across the country for the election, like the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November.
Right. All right. I want to tell you guys about BetterHelp, and then I want to dig into the man behind the book. If you think you may be depressed or you're feeling overwhelmed or anxious, BetterHelp offers licensed online counselors who are trained to listen and to help. Talk with your counselor in a private online environment at your convenience. BetterHelp counselors have expertise in a broad range of areas, including anxiety, grief, depression, LGBT matters, family conflicts, self-esteem, and more. You just fill out a questionnaire to help assess your specific needs and then get matched with your counselor in under 48 hours. Everything you share is confidential. If for any reason you're unhappy with your counselor, you can request a new one at any time at no additional charge. And I just want to underline how significant that is. I think right now you might think, well, I don't know, starting up counseling, starting up therapy with someone virtually. What if I don't click with them? It feels like a commitment. It's not. You can change at any time and they will get you the right person that you feel comfortable with. BetterHelp is an affordable option, and our listeners get 10% off your first month with the discount code BESTFRIEND. Get started today at BetterHelp. That's better, HELP.com/bestfriend, BetterHelp.com/bestfriend. Talk to a therapist online and get help. Okay. So you grew up in the DC area, I take it?
I was born in D.C., lived there for 7 years, and then we moved to Bethesda, Maryland, which is like 5 minutes outside of Washington, D.C.
One person that I went to college with and his friend, who I also know, are from Bethesda. Is it big, though?
I think it's like 50,000 people.
So that's actually not that big.
So not tiny, like mid-sized.
Right. What was your childhood like?
My childhood was very athletic because I was not allowed to play video games.
Oh.
And I was not allowed to have a set-top video game system, so I could play computer games when I was done with homework. I could play Game Boy on travel or when I was done with my homework. Mm-hmm. But I was not allowed to play video games, Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo. I was very upset about it. But I did learn weird, nerdy hobbies, and maybe even it contributed to my love of government, I guess. But I found other ways to preoccupy my time other than playing video games.
Would you do that? Would you repeat that if you have kids?
I don't know, because I feel like gaming is so much more of a part of our culture. I mean, it was definitely a huge part of popular culture growing up, and there are definitely fewer game options. But I feel like today, there are so many games, and there are video games everywhere. And I feel like on some level, I would be depriving my kids of a much bigger part of culture maybe than for me. And this is also pre-social media, so I was just spending not as much time on the computer, or we didn't have phones back then, so it wasn't weird that I was annoyed. I would play video games at friends' houses, but I definitely found enough things to do and preoccupy myself with. And I also had a younger brother who's 3 years younger than me, who I would compete against in everything from ping pong to couch basketball to. We got very competitive, honestly, to a weird degree that continues to this day, but in a friendly way. But I don't know if I would repeat it for my kids.
How does the competition manifest? And I can relate to that. I have a sister who's 3 years, 9 months younger than I am. And we are we're very close. I don't think of us as very competitive. However, I have noticed now that we both have kids, and I don't know if she would say this. This might just be my thing. This should be between me and my therapist, but I'm going to share it with you and the listeners. And I also mentioned it on Childish, my parenting podcast that I do. I find there's just a little undercurrent of competition over grandpa time with the kids. And it's sort of brought up this flare, a little bit of sibling rivalry now that we have kids and we're trying to schedule time with the grandparents and just all of that.
I feel like we were my brother is not 3 years 6 months.
Oh, so it's almost the
we
same,
have
yeah.
siblings almost the exact same age younger than us, and either it was out of boredom or competition, but we would make games where games did not exist. Like the sugar packet at the restaurant counter, while we were waiting for food, that football trying to slide it across, almost shuffleboard style to get it to hang off. That was a huge game for us. We played that all the time. It was very tense. We would play, like I said, couch basketball, wiffle ball on the beach. I still play one-on-one wiffle ball against my brother. Baseball in the yard. When he got married 3 years ago, I did a toast and I named all the things we competed against. It took me a minute and a half to read all of them. There were 40 to 50 different games. And even today, when my brother and I are competing against each other, Jackie's watches it and she sees this fire coming out in our eyes of a game of ping pong, and she's like, "What is wrong with you guys? What are you doing?" But it taps into this thing where, honestly, it's not even that I want to beat him, although I do. But early on, the more competitive we were, the better we got when we competed against our friends and not against us. Mm-hmm. So it was almost in a weird way, we were toughening each other up by being a more formidable opponent to better our skills. And then whenever we would go out, because if I was playing, on my school's baseball team, my brother was rooting for me 100% of the way. He was my biggest cheerleader. And same thing for me with him. If we're not competing against each other, we are our biggest champions. If we are competing against each other, all bets are off. Fuck you, basically. in the nicest way of saying that, with love.
Right.
But it is it's forceful.
Well, that's nice that you have that. Do you guys get into actual fights though? I don't mean physical fights. I mean.
No, I mean, not really. My brother's a little bit of a sore loser, and so he will sometimes walk away from the game if it's not going well. I'm certainly not immune to my own shortcomings. I mean, I was taller than him earlier, so I would use that to my advantage. If we're playing one-on-one basketball, it's not really fair at some point when you're 7 years old playing against a
3-year-old, 4-year-old,
3.5-year-old, 8 and 5 or whatever it is, there's a built-in advantage, but it never got to physical fight. I mean, maybe once or twice, but not really. It just got, just heated and exchanges of words.
How did you feel about him getting married earlier?
I feel like every single person that knows us saw that coming, because I don't know, he seemed... I've always been sort of a wandering spirit, if that makes sense. And I've never really had a set career. He works in politics. He works for the governor of Delaware. And he's known that he wanted to work in politics from a very young age, as a politician. And so he knew he worked in the city government in New York in education. He works in the state government in Delaware in education. And he's brilliant and he knows so much about this issue. And he is going to have a very long, successful political career. But I didn't have the same feeling when I was younger. I started out in the music industry. I thought I was going to be like a boring white boy singer-songwriter playing love songs in coffee houses. And like, I did that for maybe 6 months. My parents were like, please go back to grad school. So I did. And I studied music and business. And I began my career with all, internships and full-time jobs in the music industry. And then I moved in sort of a weird pivot to Funny or Die, and then got into comedy. And so then I was in comedy, and now I'm in this like civic education and political space. So I've had a bunch of like different careers and trajectories and changes, either because I'm ADD or I'm just sort of like following things or following my gut. But my brother's been sort of like, this is what I want to do. I want to have a family by this age, that sort of thing, and more kind of by the book, I guess.
Right. So music was the thing that you were pursuing at the beginning?
That was my dream. I did music all throughout college. When my baseball career ended, I did music all throughout college, and I did a cappella. I did 90s cover band. I'm still in a 90s cover band. Obviously, we have not been able to play in a while.
Right.
Last show was back in February. But I've just been doing music my whole life, and honestly, the tiptoeing into the comedy world through music is what sort of led me to Funny or Die.
Mm-hmm. Where'd you go to college?
I went to Emory University in Atlanta, and then I took a year off to pursue a very fleeting music career, and then I went back to school at NYU and did a joint music and business program.
NYU was grad school?
Yeah.
Oh, so the year off was after. I see. The year off was after. Got it. And that's when your parents were like, "Hey." So what did you do during that year off?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. It wasn't the brightest time in my life. It was like driving to I remember driving to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania to play some music festival that I paid to submit songs to. And I got there, and I have like a 15-minute spot in between like 10 other people on the lineup, and there were maybe 10 people in the audience. And Harrisburg isn't super close to Washington, D.C. And I was driving home at 3 a.m. It was freezing. I mean, we're talking like 12 degrees outside. I'm loading my guitar up by myself, driving home. I get home at like 3, and as I'm pulling into Maryland, I'm like, I don't think this is for me. It just didn't I also don't think I was like, I didn't, I mean, there are so many like singer-songwriters. I mean, you have to be really good to break through. You have to be just like otherworldly special and I was not that. I was very bar competent. Like you walk into a bar, I'm playing, Matchbox 20 in the corner. You're like, yeah, that's great. Like I can have beers to that. That's fine. Like a fun throwback, but no one's like, jaws are on the floor.
Did you write your own stuff, or was it mostly covers?
I did. I wrote my own stuff. I had a very, in hindsight, ill-advised foray into the original music space, and I recorded an album that I probably could have used that money for something a little bit more beneficial. And I toured behind that album for a year. And I'll just say it was a learning experience, perhaps its own stepping stone education between college and grad school. And I think I've learned a lot about writing music since then.
Okay, I'm hearing Jackie chuckling in the background. What is so funny?
Yeah, she's really enjoying this because she's heard that album.
What's so funny about this album?
Well, every 2 years or so, I revisit it out of curiosity to see how it is. And there are parts of songs that are really nice, and then there are parts of songs that are not.
Like, what do you mean? Like they're not good, or like they're mean-spirited?
Like the bridges in a bunch of the songs are like pretty fine. Like I guess I was good at writing a bridge when I was 22, but like the melodies were not good. Like extremely forgettable, not catchy, like not great song structure. The intros went on too long. Like I could have really honed in on some songwriting craft before writing that down. But every now and then there's like a moment I'm like, oh, that's actually not bad.
What's the name of this album?
It's called Soft Landing, and I'm pretty sure I've bought every copy off of the internet for security purposes. She asked, and it's a podcast, and this is an honest space where we share. If they do, fine. Someone will be out, I don't know, $12. CD Baby will be slightly richer.
Is Jackie available to pop her head in and tell us what she thinks of this album?
Jackie, are you available to pop your head in and say what you think of this album? I don't mind. I do want to be honest before Jackie shares what she's about to share. We are getting married. I love her very much. She loves me very much. We play music together. We enjoy. This is an album I recorded 13 years ago. Jackie, have at it.
Hi. Oh, she can't hear me.
I can't hear Alice.
Oh,
Can I have one?
yeah, give her an earbud.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so what do you look beautiful, by the way. What do you think
Thank
of
you. I just had my eyebrows done.
did you have them microneedled?
No, I had them shaped,
They look
and I'm so happy. Like, why didn't I do this earlier?
probably COVID, but they look great.
Yes, that is definitely that is definitely
Okay, so what are your thoughts about Soft Landing?
I cannot believe you told her the name. When I found out about Soft Landing, I was very intrigued. And I remember Ben gave me a copy of it, and I went and put it in my car, and I drove home to it, and I was honestly shocked because of how bad it was. I was so surprised. It's really bad. I love Ben so much. And I think he's so much better now. You know what I mean? Like, he's so much better now. And
We're not seeing Ben's face. Can you push the? Oh no! Now we got Ben's face.
Ben's going to be over here for the next few seconds while Jackie shares her.
Okay.
I mean, listen, if you would have given me a pen and paper and a full studio to record an album at 22, it would have been fucking horrible. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I hadn't lived yet. I didn't have anything to say. I didn't have a point of view. And I think Bennett listened to a lot of Jason Mraz. And I think that was really, like, in his psyche. And he just, it wasn't his best work. But it's really bad. I won't lie. I'm not going to sugarcoat. It's bad. Like, and now that you've told everybody, I know people are going to try to find it. And he has done everything he can to completely hide it and cover it and remove it from the earth. And you literally just told thousands and thousands of people.
If you want, we can bleep the title.
I mean, I think people need to know.
I do too.
No,
She disarms people. You did this.
I did this because I was being honest.
Thank
and
you.
we're talking about development and
Yeah.
we're getting to know the person behind this Constitution book. And my point is that you got to make some things that fail before you find something that hits.
That's true.
Yeah.
I love you, though. And I think you're so
I know.
talented. He's so good. His mom didn't let him play video games, but
I heard.
because of that, he learned to play guitar and piano and can sing and can play every game. Like, he's so good at everything. That's why it's just so shocking to me that it was so bad. It's so bad.
I forget which musician said this, but you have to write a bunch of shitty songs before you write a good song. And I just happened to record a lot of those shitty songs in a really nice studio near Bethesda, Maryland.
Honestly, this is not exactly the same. Bye, Jackie. Thank you.
Bye, Jackie.
This is not exactly the same. However, I look back on the early parts of my career and I think I had opportunities come to me that I would like to have them come now because I feel like I could handle them much better. Like, I was too green when I was too green, I was too young. There's a lot of stuff that happened early where I'm like, it happened too early and I would have handled it differently if I had more years under my belt.
Well, I feel the exact same way. And I think probably the biggest issue with that project is that I didn't know how to, I was imitating other people's voices. Mm-hmm. So it's like I'm listening to people singing and I'm like emulating their style.
Right.
And I on a whim, after I'd recorded the album, I went to a voice teacher and she was like, "What the fuck are you doing? Why are you singing like that?" And I was like, "What?" She's like, "Talk." And she did these exercises and I started singing. I had a totally different voice.
That's so interesting.
And I was just like, and it probably is because I think at the time I was very self-conscious about myself and I wanted to sort of emulate what seemed to be successful and seemed to be reachable for me. And so that meant putting an affect on my voice that was like raspier than it is. Like, I don't have a raspy voice.
Right.
Like, I have a pretty clear, higher register voice. And I was putting on this affect. And so, because it was popular at the time. And so I think it just goes to show, like, you spend a lot of early years. People do this with clothes. People do this with styles. It's not just, music and singing. It's so many things where you imitate other people's things, and then you sort of slowly find what is unique and honest and authentic to you. And it just took, a rather long, drawn out process for me to get there.
And so how did you start working at Funny or Die?
So I'd been doing some, it's funny because looking back, they're not great comedy songs, but they're certainly better than the serious music I was writing. Like, it was like topical comedy songs, and they were getting featured on Funny or Die, these music videos about pop culture things or politics. And so I was getting these, this attention. It was like back when getting placed on like the homepage was a big deal in like 2010 or 2009 or whatever, because you'd be like a video of you, like a random person from the internet, right next to Will Ferrell, right next to Zach Galifianakis.
Right.
And so I would get a lot of views on these videos, and I got in contact with a few people there. And when I moved to LA to work at this music job that changed direction quickly, was working with talent, then started selling instruments. It's like a long story. It's like a startup pivot that went horribly wrong. But I quit, and I was like, I hate this, and I'm going to give myself 8 months to find something I really like, or I'm going to move home and work for my dad. And I made a list at the advice of one of the people that worked at the company, who knew I was like super bummed. And he goes, look, take a bottle of wine, take a pen and a piece of paper. And on the left side of the paper, write down all the things you love to do. And on the right side of the paper, write down a list of companies you could potentially see yourself working at. And do it while you drink a bottle of wine in an evening. And so I wrote down all these things and all these companies. And the next day I looked at it and I was like, I feel like I could do most of these things at Funny or Die. It's a dream. And so I just started trying to meet people. I reached out on like Facebook and LinkedIn to people, and I somehow got the CEO's like cell phone and cold called him. And he was like, I got 5 minutes. What do you want? And so
Wow.
I just like weird sort of like stalkerish hustling stuff. But I guess I was desperate because I was like, well, I'm moving home at the end of the year, so why not give it all the shots that I have? And so I ended up getting a meeting there, running into the head of the company at a rather precipitous like a party, and I pitched this idea to start a music focus at the company because they were working with these amazing TV and film talent. But I come from the music world, and I knew firsthand that my friends who were working with bands like, I don't know, Grizzly Bear, Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, Twin Shadow, all these bands, whatever. These musicians, they were basically getting opportunities to play a song at the end of a late night show, and then the credits scroll over their face. And they weren't getting any chance to show their personality. But I knew some musicians that were really funny, even if their music wasn't funny. So I thought that we could start this focus of trying to get more music acts to do videos. And so I consulted for a while, and I ended up getting enough talent and making enough videos that did well that they hired me full time.
That's great. I'm like, my mind is swirling around the cold call to the CEO. What was that like? And like, would you do something like that today?
So basically, like a friend of a not even a close family friend really, but like a family friend used to work with the CEO.
Okay.
And was like, hey, you should give, like, I didn't know him at all. I'd never met him. I never emailed with him.
Is it someone that
he was like, I think I still have his number.
Is it someone whose name we know?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, he runs, I think he works at Mandalay Sports now. He used to work at ESPN.
Okay.
He's not like, he doesn't have like a comedy background.
Got it.
So he worked at ESPN for a while, and then he works back in sports, but he was like a sports media guy who had I don't know, was the CEO of Funny or Die for like 8 years or something like that. And I just called him, and he was like, I dropped like this, mutual friend. He's like, oh yeah. And he was like, I got 5 minutes. What do you want? It's like, all right. So we started chatting, and I guess he liked me enough that we stayed in contact, and then things just kind of went from there. And so I consulted for about 9 months before I was hired as like a full-time staff producer, and then worked my way up, and I was there full time for 3 years. So in total, almost 4 years.
Would you do something like that today? The reason I ask, I feel like I used to do stuff like that. Like I used to pursue, there'd be something, I'm relating to your story. Like there'd be something I would want. I used to write for magazines. So there'd be like, I want to write for, you know, Rolling Stone or People or like the top ones. I don't want to work. This is again when I was like young and full of vigor. Like I don't want to work my way up. I just want to work for I want to go straight to the top. And I would like pursue them. And I actually did write for them. And I feel like now and I think it has to do with age, it has to do with point in my career, the fact that I have kids and stuff. Like I'm much more just like, if stuff comes to me, awesome. But that thing where I'm hustling, I don't have it as much. And certainly not phone call wise.
Well, I feel like the only reason I did it is because I was really upset having moved across the country for a job that literally changed a focus. It's honestly like if you went to work at, say you wanted to work with talent, like represent talent, right? Say you want to be a talent agent. So you go and you get a job at CAA and you go move across the country to work at CAA. And 3 months into your job, they're like, hey, you know what? So we're moving away from the talent representation business. And instead we're going to sell cameras to the directors that we used to represent.
Right. Like a total
great,
pivot.
You know, great working with you, Steven Spielberg, but we got these like Canon 70s that are just like top of the line brand. I mean, that wouldn't be the brand of camera, but it changing from working with talent to selling shit to the people that we were like trying to discover.
Right.
So a really big change. And I was bummed about
Yeah.
that. And I just didn't want to do that. And so I quit and I was really living off of savings and I didn't have a lot of money. And I basically made this deal with my parents where they were like, you know, you've got enough money to live off of for a few months, you know, maybe we'll help you out for a couple months, but like, you know, you give yourself 7 months, 8 months total, and then you're moving home.
So it was like desperation, or it was like gun to your
desperation. It was only because I had a hard out.
Yeah.
Where it was like December 31st, I didn't land something. It's moving home, reevaluating life, moving back in with my parents.
Yeah.
And I'd already lived with my parents for a year, you know, in my brief year of rock stardom. So I knew I didn't want to do that again. Nothing against my parents, but I was like, I got to try everything. Otherwise, I know what is going to happen if I leave. I know what that looks like. Mm-hmm. I might as well just go for broke. Like, who cares? Worst thing that could happen is I don't get it. But like, there's not going to be repercussions because I'll be literally leaving the industry.
Right.
To go home. So it was honestly desperation and feeling like my back was up against the wall with a deadline that made me do that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have.
That makes sense. We have some questions that listeners sent in. I'm on Patreon. Patreon.com/Allison Rosen is where you go. All sorts of fun stuff, behind the scenes content. You can submit questions. You can see videos from the Thursday show. The video from this show, though, everyone can see, and that'll be on youtube.com/Allison Rosen. But let's take some questions that people sent in on Patreon, and there's a song.
When we ask, they send them in. They're wondering how you have been. So thanks so much for answering these questions from our fans.
All right. Amy Freehill says, I'm working my way through Ben's book and loving it. His writing style and explanations of what would be very difficult passages in the Constitution are broken out in an understandable and digestible format. I agree with his take that civics are not taught enough in school. Given the opportunity, what would recommend to part of a class syllabus for students? I think she means to say, what would you recommend to part of a class syllabus for students? Genuinely asking for my own educational purposes, being a 34-year-old woman and realizing I don't know dick about our government.
Well, I guess, this book I wrote for people in their 20s and 30s like me. I'm in my mid 30s, and it's because we got fucked with civics education, like because of the incentives for reading and math, like our generations, like we got starved of this. Mm-hmm. And so we've graduated into, being adults in our 20s and 30s, in the millennial and Gen Z generation. And like, we're the people who didn't get civics when we were younger because of these cuts. So, there are some really great resources. I would say the first thing to do, it's awesome that you're reading the book. I'm grateful. That's awesome. But I would say, first thing to do, and I talk about this at the end, is learn who your representatives are. And especially if you're like planning to stay wherever you are for the foreseeable future, because these are people who are going to be running your life, and know what the powers of those jobs are. So know who your governor is, know who your state legislators are. So your state senator, your state representative. Sometimes you could have more than one state representative. Your members of the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House. Knowing who these people are and following them, and then just reading about what the jobs are, because the legislators are the people who have the biggest effect on our lives. The Supreme Court and the president at the federal level get a ton of attention, but according to this document, it is Congress that's supposed to run the show. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Constitution takes up the first 7 articles take up 4 pieces of parchment. The first 2 pieces are all about Congress, and Articles 2 through 7 are shoved into the second half. So Congress is clearly supposed to be the driver of our government, but we learn that we have 3 co-equal branches of government that have checks and balances. But it's kind of a mistake the way we're taught this, because co-equal is not the same as checks and balances. Mm-hmm. You can check something and you can balance something out, but that doesn't mean it's the power is distributed a third.
Right.
So Congress is designed to be way more powerful than the president or the Supreme Court. And so I would say learning who your legislators are at the different levels is a great place to start to civically educate yourself. So knowing who your legislators are at the federal level in Congress, learning who your state representatives are, the people who make laws for your state, learning who are your county representatives are, if you have a county council, your city council, but learning the people in the legislative branch, because those are the people who make the laws, and in the vast majority of cases have the most power in your life in government.
Amy also wants to know, besides her stunning looks, what attracted him to Jackie? What makes them a good fit? Jackie is one of the most kind and charismatic podcast hosts I have heard, besides Allison, of course. Yes, thank you very much.
So Jackie and I were friends for about 6 years before we became involved. And we saw each other on a dating app. And I just had a birthday like 2 months earlier that Jackie came to. And then I saw her 2 months later on a dating app. I was like, that's weird. I didn't know that she was single.
Right.
And we decided to meet up, and then we kind of hit it off. And I really didn't, we were friendly, but it was sort of like in arm's length. Like, I didn't know her that well. Mm-hmm. Like we'd run into each other at parties, sometimes at the Funny or Die offices, or, and we met through a mutual friend, but we didn't know each other all that well. And I learned all these things about her. I didn't know that she was this amazing. I had no idea that she was this amazing singer. Like, she's an incredible singing voice. I didn't really know her sense of humor and how funny she was, and how unique she is. And it was like the more we went out and hung out, the more like I would be peeling back layers and discovering new things. And she's just like a wonderful, exciting person to be around.
That's so sweet. Okay. Sarah Park says, I was just thinking he would be a fabulous guest. I'm so excited Ben will be on your show. Given how divided we've become along party lines, does Ben see a massive shift in the 2-party system happening in the near term?
I think it has to, because where we're headed really is we've gone to such a hyper-partisan extent so quickly in the last 10 years. And I really blame 2 things for it. One is just a fractured media environment in general, whereas you used to have, these very centralized, a few, national radio stations and news sources on network news and newspapers. But it really... It's really changed because of the fragmenting of media, and specifically social media and the algorithms. And so the last 10 years, you've seen this huge shift. So I do think that something has to change. I don't see it happening necessarily at the federal level. Mm-hmm. I do think that what could help is that we get more involved in our state and local government, especially our local government, because a lot of these offices are nonpartisan. And I think other than the incorrect way we're taught the branches of government, being equal when they're not, I also think that we're taught that the federal government does everything and has all this power. And reading this book or the Constitution, writing this book, that is absolutely not the case. Like, the federal government is pretty limited. Like, it can only do certain things. Everything else is left up to the states and to local governments, which they call in the document the people. So I do think you're seeing this renewed interest in offices that aren't even partisan. Like, because of Black Lives Matter protests, we're talking so much more about district attorneys and the power of district attorneys, and sheriffs. These aren't partisan offices. In many cases, these are nonpartisan offices, but you want someone who is going to hold officers accountable for violating the law, as they would anyone else in their district for violating the law, and seek justice. You want someone who's going to manage law enforcement in your county, ethically and morally. And so we're learning these new roles, and a lot of them are nonpartisan. So I do think, as a respite from sort of because so little is getting done in Congress right now, and that's not to blame, Congress as a whole. Like, it is, the House is doing a lot, the Senate's not. Is just confirming judges at the district, circuit, and Supreme level. But I do think that when there's such gridlock and nothing's getting done at the federal level, it is kind of having this awakening for state and local government, where we're learning that so much of our lives are governed not at the federal level, but at the state and local level, and certainly the things that affect our everyday life. And a lot of these offices are nonpartisan. Like, there are some really key city council races and school board races in Los Angeles County and LA, or Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, and LAUSD, the school district. Those are not partisan offices. So it's really interesting to see, sort of this reinvigoration of state and really local offices that are not partisan, but focusing on that, when you feel like it's too overwhelming at the federal level in terms of just, gridlock partisanship.
Right. Are you surprised that Trump hasn't been removed from office? Because I, as someone who does not have such a great understanding of understanding of the Constitution that you have, just the average person, I'm just like, and excuse this extremely, partisan statement, but like, why is no one in charge? What is going on? How is this happening? Like, over and over and over, I have this reaction. Now I'm just like, okay, this thing is just going to play out however it plays out. But I know that I'm not the only one feeling that way.
You're not the only one feeling that way. And I've gotten this question a lot, and I would say there's sort of the surface answer, and then there's like the under the surface answer. So the surface answer is he hasn't been removed from office because he hasn't been impeached. He was impeached, but he wasn't convicted by the Senate.
Right.
You need 2/3 of senators to convict to remove a president. And, with a 53-47 split, getting to 67 senators, you need a big swing. So that was always an uphill battle and unlikely. But I think the question is, well, given everything that's happened, why would they not remove him? Because there are certainly things that he does that the traditional Republican Party wouldn't normally get behind.
Yeah.
Like the way he talks about Russia is a huge one. That I can't imagine, and again, my mom worked in the Senate. She worked for a Republican in the Senate in the 70s and the 80s. And I could never imagine, the Republican Party of the 70s and 80s going along with, like lionizing of Russia during
it's
back in the Cold War.
Crazy.
And
yeah.
Even I think about the debates in 2012, and I remember when Mitt Romney said, the greatest foreign policy threat today is Russia. They're, moving back toward the Cold War, and Putin is, he was a former member of the KGB and all this shit, and people just laughed at him. He was totally right. I don't agree with the guy on a lot, but he was definitely right about this specific thing.
Yeah.
So I think that, the reason that they haven't turned on Donald Trump is two reasons. One is because they're getting something out of having him as president.
Yeah.
And the other is because they're afraid.
Afraid
And
of what? Losing their constituents?
I think they're afraid of his supporters.
Yeah.
I think
I am afraid of his supporters.
Right. And one thing is that Mitch McConnell in the Senate, he is obsessed with judges. That is the longest lasting way that he can impact our federal government, is by confirming judges who serve for life, and not just the two, potentially three on the Supreme Court, but dozens upon dozens of circuit judges, dozens upon dozens of district judges. Again, these are people who serve for life, and a very small minority of federal cases will ever get to the Supreme Court. I mean, it's like, a 0.5%, if something like that. So 99.5% of cases are going to get decided at the circuit or the district level. And Mitch McConnell is getting all of his dream judicial nominations for all of these positions. He's confirming them at record paces. So it's kind of this like grand bargain where he gets his judicial nominees that he can confirm, and he'll, not publicly attack the president or kind of let him do his thing.
Right.
And the other part of that is I think some Republicans are afraid to go against Trump in private. And this isn't a guess that I'm making. This is something that I was at an event for Adam Schiff a few years ago, who's a U.S. representative here in the Los Angeles area. And I asked him, it was right around a failed vote in the wake of, I want to say, the Las Vegas shooting. Mm-hmm. And there was, it was either there was no vote or it was a failed vote. And I asked him, I was like, do people in the Republican Party genuinely not want any gun regulations whatsoever? Do they believe this dogma, or is this just a political position? Mm. And he said, this is him speaking, he said, I've had conversations with a number of my Republican colleagues in the House. A lot of them believe in common sense gun reform, but they are terrified to come out and say that because they're afraid of the NRA.
Yeah.
Because what the NRA will do is they will finance a primary opponent. They will spend millions of dollars on negative attack ads. They will whip the most extreme supporters into a frenzy who could potentially threaten that representative's life. I mean, even, again, somebody I do not agree with on almost anything, a guy named Dan Crenshaw is a congressman out of Texas. When he came out and said that he was entertaining or thinking of supporting red flag laws, which means confiscating firearms from people who have a history of domestic abuse, who have violent records and or signs of mental illness could potentially harm themselves or others. But he entertained, the idea of taking guns away from people who are domestic abusers.
Right, which seems like
he was
smart.
Seems like it makes sense. He got excoriated from people in his own party. I mean, literally for months, if not more than that, if not a whole year, he was getting threats from people over his support of red flag laws. And it just goes to show you that, like, if you deviate a little bit, we've gotten to this place with, media to the point where any sort of, not towing the line on every issue, you're not just threatening your political career, you're threatening your well-being. You're threatening the well-being of yourself and your family. I mean, people get death threats for this type of shit. It's insane. So
it's crazy.
It really is the point where, we have such an ugly atmosphere in our media and especially, sort of fringe media that creates this really sort of terrifying extremism in our politics. Mm-hmm. And so even if a person is privately for that, they will not publicly support it because they don't want to A, lose their job, or B, have their life threatened. It really is that bad. And I think we haven't really given it enough credence because...
right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. Go.
When I hear you put it that way, I have empathy for the position they're in, actually, because I think most of the time I walk around going like, oh, these, spineless sellouts, But when it comes down to like, they're risking their families' lives and well-being and all that, like I do get the position they're in.
Well, and it's not every issue. It's not like they come out on like tax reform. People are going to be threatening. It's certain issues,
right?
So and I would say
I would imagine it's guns and abortion.
Guns is a pretty extreme one. There are groups that will anyone who deviates from a pro-life position, they'll just be attack ads. I mean, they'll try to use super PACs to end their career, basically, and. It's just we've gotten to this place where we're again getting to the root of issues. Like money has corrupted so much of our campaigning, especially in the last decade. It's just the fact that people can spend unlimited amounts of money creating ads for or against somebody, you're at the mercy of just the richest person who can, intimidate politicians to, act a certain way.
What do you feel like is going on with Lindsey Graham?
In what sense?
It seems like he changed his mind about Trump. So it feels like, does someone have something on him? What's going on? Or maybe he really did change his mind.
I have no inside knowledge of this situation, but I've heard it reported enough times in legitimate news outlets that he went on a golfing trip with Donald Trump and he came back white in the face, and it totally changed his position after that and was a full-on supporter of Trump. So my theory, and this is not my theory, I've heard this expressed many times, is that Trump does a lot of his sort of blackmailing type politics on the golf course. He golfs a lot.
He does.
But he also goes with people because you're out in the open. You can't really run away. You got like a tiny, cart. You can't you're kind of trapped in not a lot around you.
Right.
And he blackmails people. So Lindsey Graham, from what I understand, again, has been in the Senate a long time. Has always been a really conservative member, policy-wise. Hasn't been sort of this lunatic that he's kind of transformed into. I mean, and I'm trying, the book really is nonpartisan. Look, I did grow up with like one parent who worked only for Republicans and another who worked for Democrats. So I have seen both sides of this, and I'm not somebody who's just like anti-Republican, but I do see this change in Lindsey Graham where he did go from this sort of person who's willing to, buck the party trend to just being so pro-Trump. And the only thing that makes sense other than some sort of like chemical change is like thinking, I don't know, is that he's blackmailed.
Right.
And it's the only thing that explains this behavior where somebody had, for the majority of their Senate career, has been very conservative, but sort of behaved a certain way and then just changed their entire style of politicking pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So, and he says, I think, the Kavanaugh hearings really set him off, but I don't know. Something is really strange, and I don't want to, speculate about his personal life into specifics. I know we've all heard things that have gone around and trended, but, I do think that from what I've seen of how the president conducts himself as an executive, not just as a politician, but as an executive, there is a mafia mentality to it. There is a blackmail mentality. I mean, he came up in the real estate business in the 70s. Like, he associated with lots of mobsters. Like that is he came of age. He learned that sort of style of dirty business, and he has gotten where he is today. I think largely because of that. And I do think that blackmail plays into his style. And so the only thing that makes sense to me for Lindsey Graham is blackmail. They've got something, they've got a videotape, or they've got some information on him that he thinks will end his political career, or potentially bring personal harm to him. It's the only logical answer that I can think of for his like hard, sharp change, sort of almost out of nowhere.
Wouldn't it be funny if it's just a video of him talking about supporting common sense gun laws? Okay. Whitney C. has a very, very personal question. What's his current skincare routine? We have similar skin types.
Hi, Whitney.
That's what she says. She says
we have
you and she have similar
skin types. Okay, so I have oily skin, and I am fair skinned, and I have actually had sort of a skin breakthrough recently, which is that my skin is totally changed. And it is because I am drinking 8 times more water every day than I ever have in my entire life. I've suffered from acne since I was 14 years old. It's been a bane on my existence. It's given, it's taken a mental health toll on me over the years. There was a period of time where I didn't even want to perform or go out and socialize or get in front of a crowd and play music or do comedy or anything because I was self-conscious about my skin. And there were so many products that I'd have to do like Accutane and all these other things that really were harsh drugs. But no dermatologist ever said, hey, you're drinking an eighth of the amount of water that you're supposed to be drinking. It never came up.
Was your urine like honey yellow if you were only drinking a tiny bit of water?
I didn't even think about it. I just did. I mean, maybe, but it wasn't even something I gave a thought to.
Right.
So what I'm doing right now is I'm drinking like 90 ounces of water a day. About half my body weight, maybe a little bit more. And honestly, I attribute this to Jackie because she got this like, I don't know what it's called, like a jar of water that has the time. I'll show it to you. Here we are. Has the times of the day on it. So like drink this much by 7, this much by 9, 11, 1, and I space it out and I go through maybe 3 of those a day, and my skin's totally different.
Wow.
Complete change. And I'm just doing like a little bit of over the counter stuff. So I do a little like Noxema salicylic acid in the morning. Just rinse my face. I don't wash it. I will promote one product that I'm obsessed with that Jackie introduced me to, the Berlin Skin Cream Sandalwood Cream. It is an anti-inflammatory cream. It has changed my life. I love it. And then I put on sunscreen every day. And then at night, I do a little, like, if I have breakouts, like a little benzoyl peroxide spot treatment. But I have learned that the key to great skincare is not just what you put on your face, it's what you put in your body. And the best thing you can put in your body is water. So up your water intake. Try to get half your body weight in water a day. I am blown away by how much it has changed my skin.
Okay, Sarah Miller says, what's it like as someone who is not a podcaster dating someone who is, knowing your life together is discussed?
Jackie and I had a conversation early on in our relationship where I, asked, I was like, I'm going to start listening to Natch B. Like when I started to come up, she told me that if she wants me to hear an episode, she'll let me know. She'll give me permission or she'll say to listen to it. But largely, to sort of keep our personal life separate from the podcast, at least in my eyes, she can say and do whatever she wants on the podcast, but on the episodes that she wants me to listen to, she will make me aware of and send to me or flag or let me know. Or if I have friends that go on her, close friends that go on her show, I will listen to it. But she likely sort of has me not listen to it.
But your feeling is she can say whatever.
Yeah, whatever she wants. It's fine. Like she can share details. It's part of the nature of podcasting. I think it enriches the relationship with your listeners, right? If it exists on authenticity. So if you're holding back or editing, it's like editing yourself. I think it tarnishes that like honesty and openness in that relationship. So I think whatever she wants to say with her listeners is fine. Like I don't think she's out there saying mean stuff. So if there are anecdotes or things that she brings into it, then it's fine with me. She'll say it to my face.
I agree with that 100%. When my now husband and I started dating, he's like now a regular on my podcast, so it's funny his evolution. But he was like, I just want you to know, like I don't think I would ever be. And by the way, I hadn't even asked him, but he's like, I just want you to know, I don't think I would ever be comfortable like being interviewed on your podcast, or like I'm just not into that stuff. Like I'm a private person, and there were even these conditions for what I could say about our relationship, which was like, I could say whatever I wanted, but he was like, I was on the Adam Carolla show at the time, and he was a listener to that show. And he's like, I just don't want to learn anything about our relationship via the show. Like he doesn't want to find out from listening that I was upset about XYZ or da-da-da. He wanted me to tell him first. So, which is fair, but all of a sudden it felt like this weight on my soul where I would go to his place after the shows and I would be like, okay, I just have to like warn you that this came up and da-da-da. And then he would listen and invariably he'd be like, oh, that was nothing. Like I freaked him out by what I said because I had this nervous energy about it. And then he would listen and it was like nothing. And eventually we just got to a point where he's like, you know what? I trust you. Just use your judgment, whatever. And it was so much easier. So
yeah, I think the trust, like if I'm going to be spending my life with this person, like I would trust them to know, where the line is. If there's something like really personal or super private, I would trust Jackie to not share that. But as far as I'm concerned, she can say whatever she wants.
How do you, this is not a question from a listener. I have one more question from a listener, but this is just a question from me. How do you feel about bringing Chooch into your life? I mean, what a blessing.
I have wanted to have a dog for a very long time. And my parents have always said that they're allergic. I think we're finding out recently that they may not be true. But I know.
Liars.
My brother is definitely... I know. Well, I do think that they did. My dad would travel all the time, and my parents would travel a lot, and we travel as a family. So they used the travel as an excuse to not have a dog. But I always wanted a dog. As far as I knew, I was the only member of our 4-person nuclear family that wasn't allergic. So I was obsessed with my friends' dogs, and I would go over to their houses to, play with their video games and hang out with their dogs. The two things I was deprived of as a child. So I never really knew what dog ownership would be like. I have had gerbils. That doesn't count. I had fish when I was younger. That doesn't really count. I did accidentally kidnap a cat once that I had for 2 weeks. I thought I was fostering a cat, and it turned out the cat wasn't missing. It was actually my neighbor's cat. And I gave it a home for 2 weeks by accident. It's honestly not my fault. The cat came up, acted like she lived in the building. I asked people in the building. It didn't live there. I saw a post on Nextdoor. Again, maybe there are some good uses for Nextdoor. If the people have the Nextdoor app, good rule of thumb, don't trust the first post you see about something on Nextdoor. So I saw a post about a cat that was abandoned in the neighborhood because a family moved away.
Oh.
And so off of that information, I thought I would take it upon myself to adopt this cat. I named her Beverly because she had to cross Beverly Boulevard to get here, from what I could tell from Nextdoor, which may not even have been true. So I started taking care of her, and I signed, I got her like her shots and all this stuff, and I had her for about 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, I get this message. I checked Nextdoor on a whim, and it's like, hey, so we've been looking for our cat Yuki for 2 weeks. She's an orange tabby cat. If anybody's seen her. And I was like, oh my God, I kidnapped these people. It was a heavily outdoor cat. So Beverly / Yuki did not like being cooped up in my apartment. Suddenly, her free reign, we're making it constitutional. I deprived her of her liberty without due process of the law. And I felt really bad. The family did get Yuki back. But then they said that she was misbehaving, and did I want to keep her? Then they offered her back to me later, and I was like, now this is sad. Like I was doing something great, and now it got really silly. It's okay because the cat was safe and like nothing bad happened to her. Like she had a home for 2 weeks, but now clearly these people are like, it wasn't just an outdoor cat. They're like negligent.
Yeah.
They're like offering their cat.
I feel like they didn't like her that much. That is sad.
Yeah. So that made me sad. So I kind of had a clean break with the situation. Like, Beverly, like they have, this is their cat. I don't know what to do in this situation.
Right.
But I want to bring it back to Chooch.
Yeah.
Because Chooch is just become a much closer member of the family than I ever could have imagined. And I feel like we have a special bond and relationship, and we have our own games, and we get along great. And she's just a wonderful, wonderful person.
I had a not nearly as heartstring tuggy cat situation in my old place that I lived in Hollywood. These 2 women showed up at my door one day. I'm surprised I answered it because I'm really not a door answering when I don't expect someone person. But they're like, hey, we're your neighbors, or we live in the neighborhood, and our cat is missing. And they seemed really sad, and they were looking for her, and they gave me the description of the cat, and I took their numbers. And then like sometime later, I noticed a cat that fit the description in my backyard. And I was like, oh my God, it's this cat. Like they're going to be so happy because and I texted them, or one of them, and she wrote back and she said that the cat has like turned feral. And so now she's just an outdoor cat, but thanks for letting her know.
What?
I'm a dog person, so I don't know how it works with cats. But like, does that they couldn't make her an indoor cat again? So blah blah blah. It seemed weird. It was your Yuki Beverly story reminds me of it. Like, does this
It's like
happen?
a quick switch for a cat, right?
Yes.
It's like a Lindsey Graham style switch. for a
Right. Who has what on this cat? Does that happen where cats just suddenly decide?
Cats are known for blackmailing for sure. Dogs are way more honest and upfront
Right.
and like friendly about it. Even if we disagree on policy, we're still friends at the end of the day. Cats are backstabbing.
I mean, maybe but like if you own a dog, it's very binary. Like it is your dog. You don't just let it go. I mean, if you do, like you're
Yeah.
a bad person. Whereas with cats, it makes it seem like you just like you kind of own them, but they kind of also are there. They own themselves. I don't know. I don't mean to get into a hacky cats versus dogs. I'm just saying it's weird the way these cats suddenly like weren't owned by their people anymore.
Yeah. I don't know what's going on with these LA cats. It seems very odd.
Yeah. Listen, there was one more question, but we don't have time to get to it. And plus, it involves guns. So I say we go out on this dog cat stuff.
I think it's a great idea.
It was so nice having you on the show, Ben. Everyone go out and get OMG, WTF, does the Constitution... Sorry. Wait a minute. Oh, I said it wrong the first time and you didn't even correct me. I said, does the Constitution actually say that? But it's actually OMG, WTF, does the Constitution actually say?
Yes.
So I had it wrong.
I didn't even notice you
Mangled
said
it. I mangled it. They're out there trying to buy a different book right now. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe. Allison Rose is your new best friend. Listen to my other podcast, Childish, that I do with Greg Fitzsimmons. Patreon.com/Allison Rosen. YouTube.com/Allison Rosen. I'm on Cameo. Cameo.com/Allison Rosen. And Ben, plug everything you'd like to plug. Tell them where to find you.
Obviously the book. I'll also remind people that it's available in Spanish. If you have friends who speak Spanish and might be interested in the Constitution, there's a Spanish version. The Gerrymander Journal, if you want to write down your thoughts and ideas and grocery lists while learning about how fucked up gerrymandering is, that's available too. And then, if you have kids, next year there's going to be a kids version for ages 8 to 12.
Oh, that's great.
Coming out next spring. And then I'm on social media everywhere at that Ben Sheehan.
But did someone have Ben Sheehan?
Someone did. Yeah. It was I think it's a chef in New Zealand or something like that. Or maybe an MMA fighter. There's some really outdoorsy, like working with their hands, Ben Sheehans on the other side of the globe.
So you're that one, the indoor one.
I'm that Ben Sheehan, not the Ben Sheehan.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it.
Listeners, thank you for listening. I love you. Goodbye.
Hey, do you know about the Allison Rosen show? We had a good time, but now we gotta go. Yeah, Allison Rosen is your new best friend.